Kevin Furniss reached out to us on Facebook and said he would love to see a video that shows the difference between taste notes when you brew exactly the same coffee two different ways. So Kevin, this video is just for you. Now I know what you're probably thinking. It sounds like a little bit of a contradiction. Same bean, separate flavours from separate brewing techniques. But what do we actually have to consider when we're trying to do this? Well, one of the first things we need to think about is how the bean was roasted. For example, you see a lot of roasters on the market today roasting their beans for espresso and for filter. Exactly the same bean, two different profiles. Now this will actually give the ability for you to taste different flavour notes from exactly the same coffee on the different types of medium that you use in order to brew that coffee. However, there is one way to utilise those beans without that dual roasting process, and it's called an omni roast. Now the coffee we're going to be using today is by Backyard Coffee. In particular, we have an Ethiopian one here. Now I really like Ethiopian coffee. This really has some of the sweetest and some of the smoothest flavours in any whole bean coffee, according to my opinion anyway. Now the reason we would use an omni roast is down to one very important fact. Now someone told me once that an omni roast has been roasted so that you get the very best from the bean. A little bit different from roasting it for two separate profiles. It's all about getting the absolute epitome and peak of what that bean can actually afford you. So what would that mean for us? Well, essentially, an omni roast means that we can use it as a coarse grind in our AeroPress today, or as a fine grind over our Ancilio Epoca S1 espresso maker. Some of the flavour notes for this particular coffee are apricot, mango and pineapple, and it should have a fairly creamy feel to it also. Now the beans themselves, when we actually look at these are a lovely medium size. And I can assure you the first thing that jumps out at me is that lovely, lovely, sweet, fruity flavour. That's why I've chosen this particular bean to give us our experiment. It's always good to start off with something that you really enjoy to see how it pans out over those two sources. I'm a big fan of Ethiopian coffee. I've always enjoyed it. I love the fact that the flavour notes are so pronounced. So let's see what actually happens when we brew this, and we'll compare the two. Now to make this a fair fight, I've actually used 15 grams of the beans in both instances. So for the AeroPress recipe, I've used 15 grams of the Ethiopian beans by Backyard Coffee. I've used 240 grams of water. I've allowed it to brew for around 45 seconds to a minute, and I've actually done a fairly semi-coarse, semi-fine grind. So it's about halfway. Now for the espresso, I've also used 15 grams of the whole bean coffee by Backyard. I've done that on a fairly fine setting, and I've used a 30-second extraction on that one. So I wonder what we're looking to find between those two differences. Well, let's have a little look. On my left, I have our AeroPress coffee, and on the right, I have my espresso. Now, immediately there's two very obvious differences. The AeroPress coffee, very clean, very consistently caramel in colour. The espresso has much darker layers to it, with a good crema on the top of that one. Same bean, two different sources. So let's taste these and see what we get from the two. I'm going to go for the espresso first. Now you almost get a very dark chocolate type of smell when it comes to the espresso one. It's one of the first things that jumps out at you. But as you give it a bit of a spin round and a really good inhale, you get a lot of that fruit that really comes straight through. Certainly the pineapple with a slight touch of that apricot are the first things that you see. But a really delicious full espresso flavour. This particular bean is very smooth as it goes down as well, with no bitter aftertaste. But certainly on the back of the taste buds, after a really good mouthful of this, you really do taste the potency of that pineapple. That's predominantly that main flavour that we're going to expect from this one today. So, that was our espresso. How about our AeroPress? Now, as we said, the first thing that we actually saw on that was that it was a much cleaner cup. The paper filter probably had a lot to play in that. Now, this is very different. This has more of an almost plum smell to it, only a very small amount, but it's a lot earthier than it was in the espresso. Now this has a very different type of taste to it and a very different type of smell. The smell itself is a lot cleaner and it smells a little bit plum-like, a little bit darker, perhaps a little bit tartar as well. Maybe that's where it comes from, the apricots. And it is a very, very different taste. The fruits almost taste like, exactly like that, slightly tartar fruits. You don't get the potency of the pineapple fragrances and certainly in the pineapple taste that you did from the espresso. This one definitely highlights the more apricot, almost plum-like taste. So it is quite interesting how we can see a very similar recipe, same amount of beans, but ground slightly different to enhance those different flavours. Now this will work with all kinds of beans. It's definitely worth making sure that you've got a consistent bean though. If you're going to brew espresso versus filter, you would naturally see very different flavours due to the roasting profile. But if you're going to use an omni roast as we have done today, it really is that case of getting the absolute true best from the bean that you can, so that it can work on either and it will really suit your home coffee making as well. So Kevin, I hope that's answered your question and I hope that's given you a bit of an insight into how you can change those flavours between the two brewing methods, all with the same coffee. Now if you do fancy grabbing yourself a bag of this at any point, Backyard Coffee, the full review is going to be available very soon, including details on how to buy these beans. So I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.